Oh, I got the recorder started. I got one person in the class, but that's okay. Not a problem. I am going to start with showing the result of exam one. I actually finished grading it over the weekend. It was took me quite a bit of time. Let me see. Where did I put that? It's right here. All right, so over here we can see the two charts. So let me see if we can zoom out just enough to show the charts here. There we go. So the first chart, which is this one here, is a histogram of grade distribution. And, we can see that the majority of the class, got A's and B's, and then some C's, and then D's and F's are fairly low in number. This is really low for me anyway. Five people basically get D's and F's. Four people got C's, and then we have 11 people getting B's and nine people getting A's. So I don't think the result is bad. Okay, this is post adjustment, by the way. And if you want to look at the actual score distribution, like not in a histogram, but the actual one, this is a graph. So the way I make this particular graph was I sort the scores first, and then I just start with the lowest score, and then I just plot it to the highest score. So we can basically see that there are three people getting perfect scores, three people getting 4.0 to begin with, but I also made the adjustment so that I think this score somewhere in between here is the actual 4.0. So that means like three people got more than 4.0 in this particular exam. We can also see some really kind of big dips like right here. So between here and here is a big dip. So it's just how the curve turns out to be. All right. So with that said, I am going to distribute the scanned copies back to you guys, electronically, and also to give you the scoring sheet also electronically. So this way you have a copy, and if you have any questions about, why, points were taken out or anything like that, you can contact me, and you will have your exam as a photocopy. But if you really prefer to get your physical exam back, I can bring those back as well. I don't have them yet. Oh no, I do. Actually, they're in my office. So if you want your paper exam back, that's okay with me. But I thought most people just want to get the PDF so they can look at it on their cell phone. Okay, cool. So that's the test. What we'll do today is to take a look at recursion again. And we're going to have probably three versions of the same program. They're all recursive, but they're incrementally cryptic. Okay, so we'll start with the one that is like super non-cryptic, and then we'll move our way into the more cryptic ones as we go. All right, so let me show you the code first. Okay, I'll put this into view right now. So the first one is long Fibonacci, and it's not long enough, so I'm gonna make this one like extra long. Okay. So the idea of making this extra long is to, it's really just to show that, this can be expressed in a very redundant way. Um, it gets the job done, okay? And it also makes it very, very clear how recursion works, as opposed to the other two is a little bit more confusing. Okay, so we'll work with this program first, and then we'll work with the other two. The first thing first, okay, so the first thing is I would just kind of copy this into online GDB. If you have not tried out online GDB, this is something that you might want to kind of give it a try, because it really is useful. And it's one of the tools that you can also use in your, CISP 360 class after you complete 300. So that means, if you have time, you can go ahead and do some practice. All right, so this is the Fibonacci code. And what we're going to do here is really just to compile and test run it to make sure that it does work correctly. So we'll go ahead and click on debug. And nope, that's just advertisement. Get rid of that. And where is my debugger? All right, I'm gonna reload it. All right, well, online GDB does not seem to be working. That's okay. It might be using the same resource as a Canvas because Canvas is okay. Yep. So Canvas is down. In fact, Amazon is having a serious problem. Okay, if you take a look at this is on Amazon side. We have narrowed down the source of the network connectivity issues that have impacted the root causes an underlying internal subsystem responsible for monitoring the health of our network load balancer. We're throttling requests to aid recovery and actively working on mitigation. So this is like 8:43, which is only about 20 minutes ago. But the problem started way earlier. It's around midnight. Yep, yep. So they're still fixing the problem. Okay, that's okay. I always have a backup. So this is not even going to slow me down. Let me show you some other stuff that may actually be of interest to you guys. Um, because if you're moving on to CISP 360, you probably don't want to use or don't want to have to rely on a web related service. So this is a way to do the same thing but without using anything on the web. This is a command line interface. Let me just start a new one because I want to get one that has a. I just want to bump up the font size just a little bit so it's easier to read it when it is recorded. Okay, so we'll go ahead and make this one slightly bigger so I get more area. So this is what we call a command line interface. You can get to the command line interface on a Mac pretty easily. It's just terminal. On a PC, you can do a CMD, and it will give you a command line interface. So with this one, I have the tool chain already installed. So that means I can. Now this is something that only I have to do. Okay, so the way that you do it may not be the same way. So I'm gonna go like, okay, this is the Fibonacci program, the first one, and it is a C program. And then what I need to do is to go back to my editor over here, copy that, go back to my command line interface, paste the whole program in, and that's it. Okay. And I can compile and run the program on the command line. It's not easy for people to learn the first time. It does have a slight learning curve to the whole thing, but it's actually worthwhile, I think, at least. So we'll go ahead and do it this way. All right, it compiled just fine, and now I can debug the program using GDB. I can list the code, put a breakpoint on line 17, run the program, and then check the value of local variable x, which is 3, and that is correct. Okay, the Fibonacci uh, sequence at number 3 is 3. All right, so this is just a quick verification that the program is working. Now I can switch back to the web interface. We can probably go ahead and stop this because I think that relates to um, AWS, failing. So the first thing I want to do is to really just kind of describe what is Fibonacci. So Fibonacci sequence is a well-documented um, sequence, and the way it is defined is recursive, okay? Or at least one way to define it is recursive. So depending on how you count, this is F Fibonacci of 0, of 1, of 2. This is of 3. That's one way to look at it, but the definition kind of varies. So one way to look at it is f of 0 is 0, f of 1 is 1. And I think in my code it is not correct. I can fix that. Good morning. All right, good to see you here. Yeah. So I think I need to fix it to be just n over here. All right. So that's the only minor difference that I made. All right. So what we'll do is we're gonna take a look at this code and run it, and also well, let me fix the code in the one that we ran earlier, just so that it is consistent with what we are going to see in the trace. So over here, I made the correction that this should be n and not 1. Then we'll go ahead and recompile the program and then debug the program again, put a breakpoint on line 17 again, run. So if you don't follow all these steps, it's okay. Okay, it's not a big deal. Okay, this is really just um, me double checking that the code is correct before I trace it using a spreadsheet. Are we good? All right. So, oh, one more thing. In case, just in case Canvas doesn't work anymore, guess what? The pages that we use in this class, they are not hosted using AWS. These are on GitHub. So that means one can fail but not the other one. So that means you still have access to the notes if you know where to find them. Okay, so that means once you get to a particular note and you go like, okay, this might be useful to me. First thing first, okay, Control P on the keyboard and print it out to a PDF. Okay, so this way you can save a copy on your own machine, and then you will not, you always have a local copy. Even if the whole network goes down, you still have a copy of this. So that would be the first thing that you can do. And then the second thing is to bookmark it. You just have to kind of click on the little star here I'm using Google Chrome in this case, and then you can bookmark, this particular web page, or you can put the URLs, somewhere in the text file. So the whole idea is you just need to have a different way to get back to the same page without using Canvas. So I was able to do all this. Okay, Canvas is still down right now, but it's not going to be affecting us in terms of the lecture. Question? No? Okay. All right. So what we're going to do is to trace the code. Fortunately, that part also does not depend on um, Canvas because everything is hosted in Google Sheets. So if you have a laptop computer or phone or whatever, you can actually follow along if you want to. I don't think it is necessary, but if that is what you want to do, that is all good too. So we're going to create a new Google Sheet and we'll name the Google Sheet the same as today's date. So it's very consistent. It's easy to find the notes of a particular day. And the nice thing about using a spreadsheet like this is you can always make a copy. So once I have something already done, you just go to File and then you go to make a copy. Then you can annotate your copy any way you want. You can color code, annotate it. You can also download it, print it out. Okay, so the sky is the limit in terms of what you can do with the traces that I have done in class. We good? All right, cool. All right, so what we'll do next is to go back to the source code, which is right here. And then what we'll do is the typical thing, we take a screenshot with line numbers, okay, so that this way it's easier to reference the line number. So we'll just take a screenshot, including the line numbers from here to there, okay? And then copy to the clipboard. That's fine. I will make another one, just so that we can have a screenshot next to us. So we'll go here and then just kind of paste it here. So this way, the algorithm sticks with the trace itself, or at least there's a copy. And then we go back and take another screenshot just so that I can display that along when we trace the algorithm. Okay, so there we go. And then for this one, I open it with this program, make it always on top, and then put it all the way to, let's say this side. And now we're ready to trace the code. So when we trace code these days, comments is always going to be in column A because we cannot put it all the way to the right hand side anymore. And then we have the line number. So like all the programs that we have been tracing since we talked about functions, we don't have global variables. We just have quote unquote local variables. So in this case, main has a local variable x. So that means the precondition actually does not have anything to say. This is after the precondition. So on line, well, we can say line 14, okay? But on line 15, we have the definition of local variable x. So we allocate the leftmost available column, label it the same as the name of the variable, and then we always want to make sure that we indicate that it has an unknown value to begin with. Okay, so this is really important. This question mark is really important for local variables. And then we continue on to line 16. Line 16 looks really simple, right? Because we are just saying, okay, x is going to get the value of f of 3. F of 3 is an invocation of a function, and it does return a value. So that means on line 16, we need to allocate the leftmost available column and then label it return info for return information. In other words, when the function f is done, it has to come back to some point, and then there will be some other operations to complete after we come back to that point. So that's what return info is for. So now we just have to say, okay, when function f is done, we go back to line 16, and then what is left on line 16 to do is the assignment operation, but we don't have the function call anymore because at that point, the function call would resolve to a particular value, so we would actually know how to update local variable x at that point. So one column is used for this purpose. And then we also need one additional column in this case because function f has a parameter. So the parameters are allocated at the same time when the return information is allocated. So in this case, we have one single column that is called n because n is what we call a parameter of the definition of function f. And we also have to specify the value of parameter n. The value of parameter n is specified by the caller on line 16, and in this case, it is simply a constant of 3, like so. So now we have allocated everything from the perspective of the caller. Everything that we can do on line 16 is done at this point. Are we good so far? Okay. This is also a good time to kind of remind you, which note is related to this one. So we have this one, 0455, which has to do with parameters. We have local variables, which is 0451. We have a function that returns a value, which is 0454. And then we also have just a general description of subroutines or functions, which is in module 0065. So these four individual modules is basically all we need in order to understand how to trace the execution of a function call. Is that okay? All right. And you can always, when you rewatch the video, you can always just kind of pause, take a look at the URL, and if you type in the same URL, you get to the same page. So that's, you know, I think it's pretty handy. All right, so getting back to the trace, okay, so here's our trace. So now we get to the function definition starting on line 3. Line 3 really doesn't do anything. If you don't trace line 3, I won't blame you. But on line 4, we do have something to do because on line 4, we are allocating a local variable r for this invocation of function f. So that means we have to allocate the leftmost available column, which is now column f, label it r, and then give it a question mark because this is a local variable. All local variables start with an unknown value. So that's why this question mark is actually quite important. Then we move on to line 5. Line 5 is a conditional statement. Looks a little bit ugly, but it's not too bad. N equals to 0 is actually false in this case because n has a value of 3. So in this case, it's pretty easy to figure out which n we are talking about because there's only one column, right, labeled n. So it's not a problem. However, it is still kind of useful to remember we are locating the rightmost column with the label. Okay. Now, since we only have one single column with the name of n, it is both the leftmost and as well as the leftmost. It's the leftmost and also the rightmost because it's the only one. All right. So it is equaling to 0. Nah, that's false because it is 3. And then we check whether it equals to 1, which is also false because it is actually 3. 3 equals 1 is also false. So that means the whole thing is going to be false. So let me just give the comments column a little bit more space, like so. All right, so if line 5, the conditional statement starting on line 5, has a condition that is false, then we have to go to the else branch. The else branch starts with line 8. So line 8 is an assignment statement. Okay, r equals to something, but the right hand side is a invocation of function f. So we are going to go through the same motion, right? So we now need a return info, okay, return info column, and we also need one column for n. So this n is being constructed right now, okay? So it doesn't have a value yet. So on line 8 right now, that n on line 8 is actually referring to column E and not column H. We are using column E to construct column H. Are we good so far? Okay, because it's important to differentiate which n we are referring to because we're only constructing column H right now. We cannot yet refer to the value of column H. All right, return info. Okay, it is when this is done, we have to get back to line 8, and what is left to do is just r equal to whatever the value turns out to be at that point, and then that's all column G needs to remember. And then n in this case is based on column E. In other words, this n here is referring to the rightmost column that is labeled n, but excluding the one that we're constructing. So that means we're referring to column E, which has a value of 3. 3 minus 1 is a 2, so that value of 2 goes here. So I'm just going to pause a little bit here just to make sure that we are good with understanding why there is a value of 2 over here. Good? Okay, so we good? All right, cool. All right, so now that that part is done, we now continue execution at the function that is being called. In other words, the mechanism of calling a function has not changed. Okay, the fact that we are calling f from inside f does not change how it is done. It is still the same way as before. So we still start on line 3, okay, which doesn't do a single thing. We get to line 4, and then it allocates a column called r again, which has an unknown value to begin with, like so. And I'm gonna have to move this image kind of like further down this way so it doesn't interfere with what we have to do. Um, and then that's r, okay. So now we kind of resize it a little bit. And I'm going to move the column here, just so that we can see these two columns. It's not really particularly helpful at this point. All right, then we continue execution on line 5. So now we want to ask, is n 0? Which n are we talking about? Which column are we talking about? So let me show you. Ex exactly. So it's the rightmost column that is labeled n, which in this case is column H, right? And column H has a value of 2. So when we ask whether 2 equals to 0, the answer is no. Okay? So we now say this is no, and then we also say, okay, but is n the same as 1? It is also false. So we have false or false, which means the result is just false. I know it looks like I was in the wrong column, but yeah, because I was typing and then I scrolled, and that's why it kind of yep. So it is still correct here. Okay, it is false. So we get to line 8 again. You go like, oh man, this is going to be long, lengthy, and a little bit tedious. The answer is yes, it is kind of. Okay, so we get to return info again. When this is done, we have to get back to line 8, and then we have to finish the assignment operation to local variable r. So we have to remember that. Yep. No, that's return line number. So return info is used when you are dealing with functions that has a particular return value. So line 11 is a return statement, and with a particular expression that specifies the return value. So that means function f returns a value. For a function that returns a specific value, that value can go to any place, or the function call, I should say, the function call itself can go any place where the return value can go. Yep. And because of that, we cannot go on to the next line because we are not done with line 16 yet. Or in this case, we are not done with line 8 yet. When we get back, we have to finish up what is left on line 8 that we need to do. Right. Yeah, I call it return information because it's not it's not just about the line number that we have to go back to. It also has to do with what else on that line do we have to do. Yep. hmm All right. So we also have to set up n, and this time, what do you think is the value of parameter n? So when we evaluate this n on line 8, we are referring to the n that is the rightmost one that is already defined. So at this point, it would be referring to column H. Column H is the n over here. N minus 1 would be 1. That's right. Okay, so we put a 1 over here. And now we're done with setting up column K. And now we can proceed. Okay, and how do we proceed? We are calling a function called f. So we are going to start at the beginning of function f, which turns out to be line 3 again. Okay, so we get to line 3, we get to line 4. Line 4 says, okay, we have to allocate another column called r, which starts with an unknown value. Okay, just like before. Okay, so even though we execute line 4 like 3 times now, every time we're allocating a different column. Okay, so that is the most important part, is every time we get to line 4, we're allocating the leftmost available column, which means the previous columns that are already used will not be reused. Okay, to give you a better idea of what I'm talking about, column F, column I, and column L at this point, they are all corresponding to local variable R, but of different invocations. Okay, so now let's see, we go here, and then we get to line 5 again. So we go like n equals to 0 is false. So we have to look at n equals 1. N equals 1 is true, so false or true is true. So the whole expression is true at this point because the rightmost n is now column k, and column k does have a value of 1. So what n equals to 1 is true. And because this is inside the or, so that means if at least one side is true, the whole thing is true. So are we good so far? On row 23 of the trace, why the expression is now true for the first time. We good? All right. So that means the path that we're going to take is now go to line 6. Line 6 is pretty simple. Okay, it just says, okay, whatever n is, okay, which is now column K, we are going to assign the value of n to R. So that means at this point, we update column L to have the same value as whatever we have in column K. So I will do the lazy thing here. Okay, it does the same thing. So are we good so far in terms of understanding why R now ends with a value of 1? Okay, we good? All right. So now what we'll do is we say, okay, this is the only statement in the then part of the conditional statement. So when we are done with this, we can now proceed to line 11. So now we move on to line 11, which is a return statement that we need to execute. Are we good so far? Okay. So now we are on line 11. The only thing we have to do is to execute the return statement. To execute a return statement, what we do is we locate the rightmost return info column, which is now column J, and then we copy and paste whatever that thing has over here. And then what we do next is to replace the question mark with the value that we are returning. So that means we are changing that question mark to the value that we are returning. According to line 11, we are returning the value of R. R is referring to the rightmost column that is labeled R, which is column L at this point, which has a value of 1. So we are returning a value of 1, which means we are just replacing the question mark with 1 in this case. Are we good so far? All right. Cool. So now we copy and paste this, okay? Skip one row in the trace and we just stick it here. The reason why we're sticking it there is so that we can remember when we get back to the caller, we're going to be on line 8, and this is what we need to do when we get back to line 8. Is that okay? Hmm? Because we copy this over here. The whole purpose of a return info is to let us know where do we need to go back to when the function is done. So that's why I copy this cell of J25 to over here, because this is actually this okay, this is this is the information that we need to utilize to know where we need to go back to and what we need to do when we get back. This is telling us, oh, we are now there, and this is what we need to do. Yep. So this is a reminder. This is actually this is what we do now. Yep. All right. But before we move on here, we also have to say, oh, everything related to the function call, the last function call of f, which is starting here and ending over here. Okay. Or I should actually say, this block here. This is not useful anymore because we are returning. We are at the end point of the last invocation of function f. So none of these columns, j, k, or l, is of use anymore at this point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to strike out all three at the same time. So we look at all three, okay, and then we just go like, okay, all of these are not of use anymore. So I'm using the strike out to indicate that at this point of time, columns J, K, and L, they are all available again. Is that okay? All right, cool. So now we are, so now the execution point gets back to line 8, except line 8 is pretty easy now, okay? It is just a simple assignment statement. We are using the right-hand side, which is the value of 1, to update the left-hand side, which specifies R. The question is, which R are we talking about? Well, it cannot be column L, because column L is now deallocated. It is not under our consideration. So there are only two R's left. One is column I, and the other one is column F. Which one do you think we are now referring to? Column I. That's right, because column I is the rightmost column that has the name of R. So that means when we execute this particular statement, it is column I that gets updated to a value of 1. Are we good so far? All right, cool. So I know I'm talking a little bit fast, okay? You guys may not have a chance to write notes, but the whole thing is being recorded. Let me double check. Because I think this is, yep, it is getting recorded. So that means you can re-watch the whole video and then slowly take notes, okay? And I think that really is an important process, because when you write something, instead of just listening to me, that is a process where you go like, oh, wait, I'm not really understanding this part here. Because when you listen to me, everything makes sense. Until you actually do it and go like, wait, what is that again? So, so try to make use of that resource. Okay, so that concludes the execution of line 8. Okay, so now we're moving on to line 9. Okay, line 9 is this line over here. It says, okay, let's go ahead and retrieve the value of R, and then we add whatever the return value is when we invoke F again, but this time with n minus 2. So what are we going to do? Well, exactly that, right? So now we have to say, okay, I can't really do the assignment yet because I have to figure out what is f of n minus 2. So the function call to f of n minus 2 is going to say, okay, we need to reallocate column J for return info. This time we have to go back to line 9. What is left that we need to do is R gets R plus whatever the return value turns out to be. So that's how return info looks like on line 9. And then this n, how do we set up this n, by the way? So this n is this n over here. So we know that this, whatever this n is referring to is not going to be column K, because column K is the one that we're trying to figure out. So which other column has a label of n? Let's scroll up and find out. Column H, that is correct. Column H has a value of 2. So 2 minus 2 is a 0. So that means column K is now going to end up with a value of 0. But I need to label as n first. But this is going to be 0. Are we good so far? Okay, we're good. All right. So now we move on to at the beginning of function f, which is line 3, doesn't do a single thing. Line 4, we're going to reallocate column L, which is the leftmost available column, for r as which is a local variable. Always starts with an unknown value. And then we move on to 5, line 5. N equals to 0 is true already. I don't bother with the other side. So when we look at line 5, if we know that n equals to 0 is true, and this is a disjunction, which is or, we don't even bother to evaluate whether n equals to 1. Because in a disjunction, you need only at least one side to be true for the whole thing to be true. So knowing that the left-hand side is true is already enough to conclude the entire OR is true. So that's also what I'm documenting here is we don't have to bother to evaluate the right-hand side. All right, so what do we do when it is true? Well, we get to line 6 again. Line 6 is saying, okay, whatever n has, retrieve that value and then change R accordingly. N is the rightmost column that is labeled N, which is once again column K, which has a value of 0. R is the rightmost column that is labeled R, which is column L. So now column L ends up with the value of 0. Okay, I'm just going to use the spreadsheet thing. It looks the same anyway. Are we still good? Okay, very good. So after that, we move on to which line? We're done with hmm? Yeah, return R. Yep. So we skip all the way to return R. Very good. So return R has two things to do. Well, actually more than two. But the first thing it has to do is to go to the rightmost column that is labeled return info. And this is the way I do it. I just copy and paste it over here. And then we change the question mark to whatever value that we are returning. So what value are we returning again? That is correct. Okay, very good. So now what we do is we copy and paste this over here. So we now say this is now the same as this, which is a reminder of by the time we get back to line 9, this is what is left that we need to do. Okay, so after that, we also say, okay, we don't need column J, K, or L anymore. So now we do the same thing as last time, which is the deallocation of those three columns. Yes. Oh, I thought you had a question. Okay, there we go. Control Alt Shift 5. So now execution goes back to line 9. But at this point, we know what to do on line 9. All we have to do is to locate the rightmost column that is labeled R, right? Add 0 to it, which is a easy thing to do, and we're done. So now we go like, okay, so who is column R? We know it's not column L because it is now deallocated. So we have to kind of look up a little bit. Column I is the R that we are referring to. It currently has a value of 1. So that means this is 1. This is now 0. 1 plus 0 is just 1. So that means, oh, okay, it is going back. It is retaining the value of 1, but because it is an assignment, we always have to indicate it is up, quote unquote, updated. So now we move on to whatever is after line 9, which is line 11, right? Because line 9 is the end of the else block of line 5. So now we move on to line 11. Line 11 is the execution of the return statement. In this case, we go like, okay, let's get back to the value of R. R is the rightmost column that is labeled R, which in this case is column I. It has a value of 1. So we are returning the value of 1. So now what do we do when we execute a return statement? Yep, exactly. So we have to first find the rightmost return info column, okay? And I know this looks a little bit harder to track now because um, we have to kind of scroll up quite a bit in order to find it, right? So column J is not what we want to use because column J is already deallocated. So the next column, the rightmost column that it has a return info label, is actually column G. So now we go to column G, okay, we go like, okay, copy and paste it, okay, over here. and then we change the question mark to the value that we are returning, which is really just 1. Okay, so that concludes the execution of the return statement. And then what we do is also to copy and paste this cell over here. So now I can use the same trick to save myself some time. Okay, so I can just go like, okay, whatever that cell has, just copy over here. And then we are now also ready to deallocate columns G, H, I. So that means to be lazy, I can copy and paste the struck out version already, like so. Okay. And now the execution point is now back to line 8. And this is line 8 right here. And we are going to use the one, which is specified already here, to update variable r. So now we have to go like, okay, what variable r are we talking about? So this takes a little bit of time because we have to scroll all the way back up to see that, oh, column F is the only column that is labeled r. So now we have to go like, okay, let's remember we have to update column F. So that is now going to be a value of 1. And then we move on to line 9 because that concludes the execution of line 8. When we get to line 9, we go like, oh no, not again, not again, because now we have to, do the same thing. So when we execute line 9, we have to allocate the leftmost available column. So which one is the leftmost available column at this point? Column G, you're correct. So we reallocate column G to be our return info, except this time we have to say, okay, remember, when we are done, go back to line 9. And what else do we have to do on line 9? Pretty much the whole thing except for the function call. But because the call to F has a parameter n, we also have to ask, okay, what is n? N is now, or the new n that we are setting up is whatever the current n is minus 2. So now the question is, what n are we referring to when we say, okay, what minus 2 are we talking about? It's the rightmost column that is still labeled n, excluding the one that we are setting up, right? So which one are we looking at now? Go like, oh, column E, which has a value of 3. So we are looking at 3 minus 2, which is 1, right? So we stick a 1 over here. All right, so we are still good, okay? Because this is a little bit complicated, right? And then we continue execution at the function that we're calling, which is line 3, which doesn't do a single thing. We get to line 4. We have to reallocate column I for local variable r. So we go like, okay, this is r. It starts with an unknown value. And then we move on to line 5. Line 5 is saying, okay, n equals to 0 is false. Okay, wait, there's one more chance to make it true. What about equal to 1? It is true, right? Because we're looking at the rightmost column that is labeled n, which is column H, which does have a value of 1. So n equals 1 is true, so that means the whole thing is true. We get to line 6. Line 6 is just saying, okay, retrieve the value of n, which is this column, and then copy that to r, which is over here. So that means, okay, we can do that. That's not too hard, like so. And then from line 6, we are now done with line 6. Where do we go next? Yep. Yeah, because this is the end of the then statement. So that means we skip the else statement altogether, and then we get to whatever is after the conditional statement, which is on line 11. On line 11, we execute the return statement. So when we execute the return statement, first thing we need to do is to figure out what value are we returning. We are returning the value of r. Which r are we looking at? The rightmost column that is labeled R, which is currently column I, which has a value of 1. So we are returning a value of 1. So now we go like, okay, now that we know what value we are returning, what do we need to do? Well, we need to go retrieve the rightmost return info column, right? Return info cell, which is column G. So we go like, okay, copy and paste it. change the question mark to the value that we are returning, which turns out to be just 1, and we are done with the execution of the return statement. And then after that, we also have to remember to copy this cell to over here, because this is a reminder. This is a reminder of what we need to do next. This is telling us that we need to do it now. Okay, so that's the difference. And then at that point, we also do not need column G, H, or I anymore. So I'm just going to be doing the lazy thing. Just kind of paste these three over here to indicate that at this point, column G, column H, and column I are all deallocated. And now our job is to figure out what is R plus 1. This R is referring to, once again, the rightmost column that is labeled R, which is column F. Column F currently has a value of 1. So now we're asking, oh, what is 1 plus 1? It is 2. So we're going to update that column with a value of 2. And then after line 9, we are going to line 11, which is the execution of a return statement. We're returning the value of R. R has a value of 2, so we're returning a value of 2, which also means, oh, okay, now we need to find the rightmost column that is labeled return info, which is column D. Okay, so we copy and paste that over here. And then we change the question mark to the value that we are returning, which is just 2. And then we copy and paste this over here, okay, because now we need to say, okay, when we get back to line 16, that's what we need to do. And then after that, we have no use of the 3 columns, which is column D, E, and F in this case. So we paste it over here, and now execution continues on line 16. Line 16 is all the way down here, but it actually looks like this now because we know the invocation of f of 3 has a value of 2. So now we say, okay, we know the right-hand side of the assignment is 2. Who am I going to update? We have to go find x. So what is the rightmost column that is labeled x? There's only one column labeled x, which is column C. So now we go like, okay, column C is the one that we need to update to a value of 2. And then we move on to line 17. Line 17 is a return 0. For this class, we just say that, okay, when we get back to return 0 in main, we are done. All right, so I know this is quite a mouthful, right? It takes me a long time to describe this. But what I want to do is really to show you what the picture looks like in terms of the shape. So let me see if I can just capture that. I can shrink it a little bit. The problem is, the header of the spreadsheet took up a lot of space, so it doesn't look the way that I want it to look like. So maybe if I print it, do you guys see the shape? It goes like it goes out and it goes back in a little bit. See, it goes back in just here and then reallocates here and then it goes back out again. So so the shape is kind of important because it shows you that um, it's the edge is always like that. Okay. Um, so I would actually recommend you guys to print this out and then use a pencil. Just use a pencil to draw the outline of the whole thing. So the outline is going to be something like this. Okay, just draw the outline of the last column that is in use. Okay, and then string back and then go back out again. Because that exercise will help you understand, how we dynamically allocate and deallocate the columns. Yep. All right. So are we good with this, Trace? Cool. All right. It took a little bit of time because there's a lot of explanation, to do at the same time. Okay. So we're gonna say cancel. Okay. Right here. And now we are done with the first version, which is like the really, really long version. Do you guys need a break or should we continue with the shorter version? We're good? Okay. All right, so let's move on to the shorter version, not the shortest. So the shorter version is right here. We do not have the local variable r in anymore in this case. So when you look at function f, let me see if I can show both at the same time. This one I have to show on the as a screenshot anyway, might as well do it now. So this way we can kind of compare and contrast this version with the longest version. So now we go, okay, let's open this up on the side and then make it always on top, like so. And then you can switch back here. So what we want to do is to compare the two function f. You can see how on the left-hand side, it has a local variable r, right? And the local variable r is used to specify the return value and to work on the return value. And then there's only one final return, at the end of the entire function. On the other hand, the shorter version does not have a local variable r anymore. Instead, it is saying, oh, okay, we are computing f of n minus 1 plus f of n minus 2 in a single expression instead of spreading it out into line 8 and line 9 of the extra long version. So it accomplishes exactly the same thing, but it's a little bit trickier to track as a result. So this is why I want to present the really extra long version first, just so that we understand what the logic is. But it's a little bit tedious, and R is really not necessary in this case. So that's why we now want to look at the shorter Fibonacci, because it accomplishes exactly the same thing, but the notation is a little bit more complicated. Are we ready for it? All right, let's do it. All right, so what we'll do is we are now putting this over here, and then we'll go ahead and do one more screenshot just so we can paste, oh, not of this one, of the other one, just so that we can paste it into um, the spreadsheet itself. So this way, the spreadsheet is more or less self-contained. You can just look at the spreadsheet and know what we are tracing. So copy to clipboard, go back to the spreadsheet, add one more, okay, and then we just have to, I will stick it all the way out here, paste, there we go. All right, so we got comments and then we got line number the same way. So I'll just be quick about the first few steps because they are identical. So we start with line 11, doesn't do a single thing. On line 12, main is allocating x as a local variable. And then we continue on to line 13, which looks like the same as the other one but on the different line number. So we're going to go through this really quick too. We allocate the next column, the next available column, or the leftmost available column. Return info. We return to line 13. X gets whatever the return value is, and that's it. And then n as a parameter starts with the value of 3. All right, so this part is identical to last time. The line numbers are shifted a little bit just because the program got a little shorter. Okay, let me get this all the way here. There we go. All right, so now after line 13, we go to line 3. Line 3 doesn't do a single thing, and we don't have an extra column to allocate for R anymore, because in this case, there's no local variable R in F. Okay, F does not need a local variable. So that means when we get to line 4, we are evaluating the condition right away, which is asking, okay, does n equal to 0? No, because n is 3. Does n equal to 1? Also no, because they do not equal. So now we say, okay, fine, the whole thing is false. So that would get us to the else branch on line 7. So this is where things go a little bit hairy, okay? Because on line 7, it's a single return statement, but the expression that we are returning has two function calls to f. Okay, so we go like, okay, we handled one function call at a time. So let most people read from left to right. So that's what we're gonna do here is from left to right. So now we go like, okay, line 7 is a little bit tedious, but we are going to handle the left one first. In other words, we are first handling f of n minus 1, and then after that, we'll handle whatever is left. Okay, So that means the return info is going to read like line 7, still has got stuff to do. It is a return statement. And whatever is the left-hand side of the plus is the one that we are trying to resolve right now. Whatever is left over on the line, we just copy the whole thing. Is that okay? Because that is the mechanism of setting up the return info cell is we just have to focus on one function call, okay, and replace that entire function call with a question mark. The purpose of the question mark is simply as a placeholder. It's like, okay, when we figure out the return value of this function call, stick it here. That's what a question mark is, but we can only handle one at a time. So that's why we only have a single question mark. The other one, whatever is left on that line, we just leave it whatever, we leave it as is. Okay. So we also have to remember to set up, column n or the column for n. So we allocate column G for the parameter n. So this n is referring to column E because this n where the mouse pointer is pointing at is referring to the rightmost column n that is already defined that has a value, which in this case is column E. So what is uh I take it back, sorry. That was my mistake. I should be talking about this n over here because that's the function call that we're dealing with. So this n is referring to the rightmost column that is labeled n that is already set up. And which column would that be? Column E, which has a value of 3. Okay, very good. And then 3 minus 1 is 2. So we put a 2 over here. Okay, so now we are done setting up column F and G, which means now we can continue onto the beginning of function f, which is on line 3, doesn't do a single thing. Line 4, we go back and check the condition again. So n is now 2, 2 equals to 0 is false. N is 2, 2 equals to 1 is also false. So false or false is also false. So now we get to line 7 again. So line 7 says, ultimately, I want to figure out what this value is and then return it. But we cannot return yet because we have not figured out a single thing. So now we have to go like, okay. Since this is the first time we get to line 7 for the second invocation of the function f, so now we have to go like, okay, fine, what do we have to do here? So we go like, okay, since we have to call, because we have to handle the first function call on the right, on the left-hand side of the plus, so it looks the same as the other one. Okay, we have to allocate a new column H, label it as return info, and then just specify where we need to go back to, which is on line 7. What else do we have to do over there? We have to finish up the addition of with f of n minus 2 and then return that. Okay. But in order to call f of n minus 1, we need to figure out what is n minus 1 as as the parameter n. So this n is referring to the rightmost column that is labeled n and is already set up. So which column would that be? Column G, which has a value of 2. 2 minus 1 is 1. So that means we put a value of 1 over here. And now we are ready to go to the beginning of function f, which is line 3 again. We get to line 4. But this time, when we ask n equals to 0 is still false because it is 1, but n equals to 1 is true. So now we have false or true, which is true. And then we continue on to line 5. Line 5 says, oh, just return a 1. So we already know the value that we are returning is 1. Now we just have to figure out, okay, which return info are we changing? It's the rightmost one, so that's going to be column H. We copy and paste column H over here. And then we change the question mark to the value that we are returning, which is 1. And we're done. So this part looks confusing, okay? Because we are executing line 5, which ends up modifying a return info that has something to do with line 7, which is also a return statement, okay? It looks confusing, so the thing that you have to remember is it doesn't matter what kind of gibberish is in the return info cell. All you want to do is to find the question mark and change the question mark to the return value that we are specifying. Okay, all right, because otherwise it can be very confusing. All right, so after this, we basically copy this to one cell forward like so, okay, because that's a reminder of what we need to do next. And then we can now deallocate both of these columns. Okay, copy, paste, shift, alt shift 5, and now we are continue execution on line 7, which looks kind of confusing because this is what we're trying to execute. We go like, we cannot return yet because we still have to figure out what is f of n minus 2. So that means we have another call of n minus 2 at this point, which means, okay, how do we call a function and the function is returning a value? First, we have to allocate the leftmost column for return info, right? And then in that particular column, we have to specify where are we returning to, which is always going to be the same line number as what we have in column B. Okay, so always going to be line 7. And whatever, and then we copy the whole thing as is, except for the function call itself. We replace them with a question mark. So that means, okay, just copy the return, the 1 plus, oh, this is f of n minus 2, which is the function call that we are trying to take care of now. That is the only place that you replace with a question mark. All right. But because we are calling function f, it also expects a parameter of n. So now we have to reallocate column I for that new parameter of n. And the expression is fn minus 2. So this n, where the mouse pointer is pointing to, is referring to the rightmost column that is labeled n that is already set up. So which column would that be? Column G, very good. So column G has a value of 2. 2 minus 2 is 0. So that means the value of the column that we're currently setting up is going to have a value of 0 this time. Okay, then we are all set up. We go to the beginning of the function of the beginning of the function that we're calling, which is starting on line 3. We go to line 4. N equals to 0 is true already. Okay, and then we get to line 5. Oh, I I messed up here. This is my mistake. I totally messed up. Let me get rid of this and get rid of this. I forgot to make changes to this one. This is supposed to be returning n, not 1. It doesn't change the previous one, but it changes this one. So I do apologize. So I have to recopy the whole thing. Give me a second. So we may not have enough time for the most succinct version of this, but it's okay. We'll deal with that one at a time. There we go. And then just kind of stick it over here, paste it, and then go back, and then we have to make another snapshot to display it. There we go. This time we only have to display always on top. There we go. Okay. So this was my mistake. I forgot to update this one. There we go. Alrighty. So we are now getting back to line 5. Okay, line 4 is done. The condition is true. So now we get to line 5. Line 5 now is correct. It returns a value of n, which is just 0, because this n is the one that on this is okay. On line 5, this n is referring to the rightmost column that is labeled n, which is currently column I, because column I is labeled n. So we're returning a value of 0. So that means we locate the rightmost return info cell, copy and paste it, and then change the question mark to the value that we are returning, which is a 0. But we have to remember, don't try to simplify here, because as much as you guys go like, I know what is 1 plus 0, but don't change it here because we are not executing this statement at this point. All we do is we replace the question mark with whatever value that we are returning. Okay. All right. And then after that, we go like, okay, copy and paste it over here. Okay. So I just do it the lazy way. And then we have no use of column H and column I anymore. So we mark those two columns as deallocated. Now the execution returns back to line 7. What else do we have to do on line 7? Not much, okay, because we can figure out what is 1 plus 0. It's just 1. So we are returning a value of 1 now. We're executing a return statement, okay? So now you have to kind of, it helps if you write down, next to, on a piece of note to go like, okay, what do we do when we execute a return statement? We locate the rightmost column that is labeled return info, okay? That's the first step. That's not column H. Column H is gone, okay? So that means, oh, it has to be column F, okay? Locate it, copy and paste it. And then what is the next step? Replace the question mark with the value that we're returning. Since we're executing this, the return value is 1. So that means we just have to change the question mark here to a 1. Okay. I think of the entire trace for this shorter version, this is probably the most confusing step. If there's a most confusing step, this is it. Because the return statement that we're executing, okay, let me point out which one. This is the statement that we're executing. Okay, we are following this instruction to do stuff. But the stuff that we are doing is to retrieve something like this and change the question mark to a 1. It just turns out that the return info also looks similar to the statement that we're executing. Is that okay? Because of the entire trace, this is the point where most people make a mistake because they're confusing which one are we executing and which one is the one that turns out to look the same as the one that we're executing. Okay, so do we have any questions about this step? Nope. Okay. So then we finish the last portion of what the last portion of executing a return statement, which is to say, okay, let's keep track of what we need to do when we get back to line 7. So yes, we are in fact going from line 7 back to line 7. Okay, so this mechanism is correct. It is not making a mistake. This is exactly what we are doing. Then we also have to remember to deallocate column F and G because that particular invocation of F is now done. So now we are back to line 7 again, right? But it should not be confusing, even though it looks confusing, because we are trying to execute line 7 right now. We go like, okay, ultimately we want to return, but with a value, but we can't do it now because we still have to figure out what is f of n minus 2. So that means we have to invoke f again using n minus 2 as the parameter n. Okay, so that means, okay, so if you have a piece of note, with you and go like, okay, what do we do when we call a function that returns a return value? Then you have to reallocate this column. Oh, not this one, sorry. You have to reallocate this column and say, oh, okay, we need this to specify or to keep track of the return info. What do we need to keep track of? Pretty much the same thing as this one. Okay, in fact, that's one way to do it. Copy the whole thing over here. Why is it not pasting? Copy, paste, and it's not doing it. Uh, oh, it wants to copy value only. There we go. So this is the function call that we are trying to take care of. So replace that with a question mark. Okay. We also have to reallocate column G for parameter n. So now we have to go like, okay, we are taking care of this particular function call. This is the expression that we need to use to figure out what goes here. So this particular expression says, okay, let's go to n. This would be the n that is the rightmost column that is labeled n that already has a value. So it's not column G itself, and it is going to be, I think, column E. Yep, so column E has a value of 3, and 3 minus 2 is 1. So that means this particular column G now starts with a value of 1. Are we good with that? All right, because this is a little tricky, right? So now we are all set up with the return info and all the parameters. There's only one. So now we start at the beginning of the definition of function f, starting on line 3. It doesn't do a single thing. Get to line 4. We evaluate n equals to 0 is false. Then we give it a second chance. N equals to 1 is true. So we get to line 5. Line 5 says, let's go ahead and execute a return statement with the value of n. The value of n is 1, so we are returning the value of n. So that means we go to the rightmost return info cell, copy and paste it, and then we change the question mark to the return value that we are specifying, which in this case is 1. So now don't simplify this to 2 because this is the return statement just changes the question mark. That's all it does. So now we go like, okay, now what do we do? Well, on line 5, we are now done with changing the question mark. So now we can say, okay, let's put it over here so that we remember that after we return, we have to get back to line 7, and this is what line 7 would look like. And then we don't have use of column F and column G anymore. So we now copy these two over here to deallocate those two. And now the execution point is getting back to line 7, which is return 1 plus 1. What is 1 plus 1? 2. So we are returning a value of 2. Okay, now that we know what value we are returning, we have to go through the rest of what a return statement needs to do, which is look up the rightmost return info cell. It's not going to be column F, it's not going to be column G because they're both deallocated right now. So who would that be? Column D, that's right. Okay, so we copy and paste column D over here, and then we say, okay, we place the question mark with the value that we are returning, and what value are we returning? 2. Very good. Exactly. So that's all we need to do. We also have to indicate when we get back to the caller on line 13, that's what is left for that to do. So we just do it this way. And then once again, at this point, we are done with um, the first invocation of function f. So now column D and column E are not of use to us anymore. So we basically deallocate both of those columns. And now the execution point get back onto line 13. Line 13 says, oh, the right-hand side is determined. It's 2, easy peasy. Who are we updating? We're updating x. So where is x? Column C. So now column C gets a value of 2. We get onto line 14, and line 14 is a return 0, which means we're pretty much done. Yep. So this one is a little bit shorter because of because we don't have a local variable r anymore. Okay, it looks cleaner. It is a simplified version. We don't have enough time to go through the last one, but I do want to go over a few things on the last one before we talk about it on Wednesday. Okay, so we'll go take a quick look at the last one because it has a notation that is kind of new to us. Okay, this is the last one. So this one is even shorter. In other words, function f is just this much. And it looks really, really confusing. It's like, what is that? Okay, we have never seen the question mark itself as an operator or the colon as an operator. This is what we call the ternary operator. So a ternary operator in general, okay, you can look at it as a operator. Instead of having 2 components, it has 3. The first component, which in this case is called, it's just, I designate A as, to note that. So the expression A is a condition. So you evaluate A as if it's just a regular condition, which is either true or false. If A is true, okay, then you evaluate expression B, which is between the question mark and the colon, and use the value of expression B as the value of the entire expression. On the other hand, if A evaluates to false, then you use expression C you evaluate expression C, and the expression C becomes the value of the entire expression. Yep. No, if A is true, then B is the value of the entire thing. If A is false, then C is the value of the entire thing. All right. So this is a little bit, I don't want to trace the code, just because one, we don't have enough time, and two, I really want to kind of go through um, the ternary operator a little bit more. So I want to give you guys, something like this. So I'm just printing a ternary expression, and you guys can tell me whether, what it's gonna print. Okay. So we'll go like 2 is less than 3 question mark 4 colon 5. So what is the result of the entire expression? So is 2 less than 3? Yes. So if it is true, hmm? No, no, no. If it's true, it will be B, which is a 4. That is correct. So it is indeed a 4. So let's try something else. If greater than, right? So in this case, it's going to print. That is correct. Yep, that's how it works. In other words, the ternary operator is kind of like an if then else in a single expression. That's basically what it is. It is an if then else in a single expression. If, okay, so I'm going to use a mouse pointer here for people who are going to watch the video. If this, then this, else this. So it's an if then else rolled into a single expression. So you ask, so why is it cool? It is cool because the entire expression, in this case, can go any place where an integer value is expected. It takes up less space, but it can also go places where um, you okay. So let's compare this version with this version here. I think this is actually a great way to display it. So when you compare these two versions, okay, I have to make a correction here. same, same correction as last time. But when you take a look at this, between these two, this one uses the actual control structure of a conditional statement to express something that can easily be wrote into a single expression. So that makes this really short version a little bit more cryptic because it is not obvious that we are dealing with a conditional statement, but at the same time, it has the entire function f has one single return statement. The complexity is instead of using a conditional statement with the then and the else and two return statements, the complexity is now hidden or encapsulated by the expression itself. The expression using the ternary operator is including the logic of a conditional statement. All right. So we are out of time today. Thank you for being here. I hope this helps. Okay. And we'll continue with the tracing of the really short version on Wednesday. So between now and Wednesday, if you go back and you just kind of jot down some notes. Use the spreadsheet that I have already because that's going to be helpful. So use it, and then you can make a local copy. Then you can annotate it any way you want. I can give you a few tips too as to what you can do. This can be useful. So on a particular cell, you can go to Insert and then go to Insert Comments. There's a place where you can insert comments. I just have to find out where you can do that. Huh? Is it over here somewhere? View? Yeah, I think that's just for viewing. It's not for adding, but I think you can do it by right clicking. So if you right click, you can go to scroll down, you can insert notes, you can also insert comments. So both of those can be really helpful. I think one is hidden and the other one shows. So if you insert a note, insert comments, you can go like blah, okay, and then you click comment, and then that blah does not show until you hover over it. I think if you insert the other one, which is note, it shows all the way, all the time. This is note. Oh, it's you can have a conversation with comments, but I was not trying to ask for comments. I was trying to create a note. Insert note. Yep, there you go. Nope, it's still something that shows up only when you hover. There we go. So when you hover, it shows the note. If you click on it, it shows the comment. So you guys can play with it, right? You can play with it and see which one works best for you. But this is what is useful about the spreadsheet is you can now make a copy and do whatever you want with it. Yep. All right. I'll see you all on Wednesday. Yep. Don't forget the homework assignment that's due on Wednesday. Yep. Hmm. Yep. You too. Delete notes. Right. Good morning. Hmm? Yep. And this is the concise version using a ternary expression. Hello. Again? Okay. The confident part is actually important because when you feel anxious, um, anxiety is a function of the innermost part of your brain. I call it the lizard brain. So when you're in fight or flight mode, it actually physiologically suppress your monkey brain, which is your neocortex. The part that can actually do calculus is the part that is getting suppressed when you worry about getting calculus done. Yep, yes. But your brain, your old brain does cannot differentiate whether a threat is actual or whether it is just you thinking, oh, I may not be doing well in a test, as opposed to a lion is chasing me. Your lizard brain doesn't know the difference. It's like shit. That's always what to say, and then it pumps you up with all the stress hormone, which suppresses your higher functions. Yep, yep, yep. So it's useful to learn. No, it does not. This is also why road rage happens. Because by the time road rage happens, the immediate threat is already done, already gone. Okay, there's no threat. The accident did not happen. Okay, but people get pissed because that gets their adrenaline and all the cortisol and all the other stress hormone activated. Yep. So it's helpful to learn how to quiet down your lizard brain. I think for me, conscious breathing is like you're really breathing is interesting because it overlaps between what you can control and what is also autonomous. So when you go like, okay, I'm overriding my autonomous function of breathing, and I'm intentionally telling myself, take a deep breath, make sure you oxygenate, and then and then just breathe out slowly. Okay, that quiets down the lizard brain because it's a mechanism to do that. Yep, yep, yep. We all learn, right? Yep. Okay. Yeah. Yep. Canvas has been down since for a long time. So it is still down right now. Continue to apply mitigation steps, which means we haven't fixed it yet. And they found this problem at midnight. So the whole thing has been going on for 10 hours. And they're still, hmm? So even before that? Uh, yep. It'll be stressful. Yeah, that's good. Yep. hmm hmm So we may not have a lab, today because if Canvas is down, we cannot really do the lab, but the lecture portion is not impacted. I know my shit well enough. um, uh, I think we're probably okay with just the usual duration because the lecture content today is going to be a little bit on the denser side, so I don't want to stack up too much stuff before you guys get a chance to absorb it. So I think we're good in terms of timing. We're doing okay. Yep. hmm Okay.